So your name, your company name, and how long you've been in the business. So.
Okay, so my name is Brielle Uszenski. I'm the owner of I Do Wedding and Event Planning, and I have been in the wedding industry for over a decade, but I have owned the company, it'll be 5 years this year, so yeah.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So overall, when it comes down to a timeline,
Yes.
who runs the timeline?
Okay, so this is a loaded question.
If
Go
you
ahead.
can, when you answer a question, just to help edit, so try to reiterate the question. So like, when it comes down to timelines, the person who's in charge, things like that would help out a little bit. So
okay.
Once again, so who runs the timeline?
Okay, so when it comes to timelines, it's a little bit of a loaded question, only because if you ask like a DJ, for example, they might say that they're in charge, and you are, of the reception. However, if you ask me as a planner, I would say it's me, because typically I am taking all of the pieces of the puzzle, like not just yourself as a DJ, but the venue, the photographer, like I'm taking everyone's timeline and I'm putting it on one. And the reason is because you have a very specific way that you want to run the party as per the clients, but the venue has a very specific way that they want to do it because of their food service part. And the photographer wants to make sure they deliver. Everyone wants to deliver what they said that they would to the couple. So it's just a matter of getting all of that together, so to speak. So I would say it's me, but it depends on who you ask, I feel like.
I do agree.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to a timeline, what vendor should the couple go to first? Should they go to the planner first to figure out the timeline and details?
So I think that the couple should go to the planner first for the timeline, only because, for example, let's say that the couple, I always give this really funny analogy, right? What if the couple wants to do a flash mob in New York City? What if the couple has somebody that they want to sing Sinatra during like dinner, whatever it is, right? They may not really necessarily know to tell other vendors that. And so, or like they'll say to me, hey, so we have all these people who are coming for pictures, later in the day or something to that effect. Or I have my sister who's not going to be able to make the pictures until 3:00, whatever it is. So I'm taking all of their like pieces of the day, and I'm trying to make them fit as per what everyone else's parameters are. So for example, if they want to do a flash mob in New York City, I'm like, all right, so that means that hair and makeup has to be done at this time, and the bus has to leave at this time to get to the city by this time, factor in some traffic, and do all of that stuff. So I think they should come to me first so I can kind of set expectations, and then I also do set them up for success with the other vendors. So for example, if they did have that person who has that family friend who wants to sing Sinatra, I'm like, well, did you tell the DJ this? And I'm like, well, no, we figured we would go over this later. And I'm like, well, you have to tell them, because then that's going to make a difference for you. And so I think it's, again, me, but it depends on what they're trying to achieve, I feel like. And also, I don't feel like everyone knows the right order, or if there is a right order to book vendors.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would argue with you on that.
Go ahead.
Right?
Go ahead.
And and not the DJ, I think the first person that a couple should ask for timeline should be the photographer. That's in my mind,
okay.
Because I think with the images between the ceremony and their formal images, I think that's one of the most important parts of the wedding reception. So in my mind, I'm always like, ask your photographer, because you're dealing with sun, you're dealing with everything like that.
So I'm going to argue back.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. I'm going to argue back, because I already, one of the first things I do is I put the sunset on my timeline. And the second thing I do is we talk about what you can't change. So what time is ceremony? What time is cocktail? What time is reception? We can't change those times. Once they're set, right? So, and I'll talk to them about their photos before they even get something from their photographer. So for example, I'll be like, okay, what's important to you photo-wise? Is it your couple portraits? Is it your family pictures? Do you guys want to recreate your parents' wedding photo? What is important? And I get all that information, and then I give the photographer more than enough time to do whatever it is creatively they want to do. And especially if I worked with the photographer before, we collaborate. So I'll create a shell, and then when I'm giving you some of my secret sauce here, part of my thing as a planner is I want to have a collaborative meeting with the DJ, with the photographer, with whoever, all three of us, to make it so that way they can do whatever it is they need to do, but I can then be like, oh, well, here's the problem with this venue. Like, they won't preset a salad. They won't bring dinner out at this time. They won't do this because I know this already, but the photographer may not. So the photographer is not talking to the venue, the DJ. They don't necessarily know what's going on. And so I feel like it needs to be a collaborative conversation. So that's why I feel like I, again, should be the first person because I have to think about all the pieces. Whereas if the photographer makes one, I usually accommodate it. Like I'll usually end up editing my timeline to theirs, like if it's possible. And 9 times out of 10 it is. But sometimes there's some other thing that they don't think to tell the photographer because the photographer doesn't know to ask it.
Amen. So I guess putting all this information together must be quite difficult. So are there any tools or resources that you use to be able to put this information from photographer, from DJ, from videographer, from venue? Like how do you collaborate this and express it to your couples?
So I have a program that I use called Timeline Genius, and I'll have to show you this really awesome program. But they have I will be honest, I'm old school. So like when I started using this program, it's been years, but now they have all of these like cool things where you can like type in ceremony, cocktail reception, and it'll spit out a timeline that is like appropriate, so to speak, and then you can go in and edit it. But I do mine like super old school where like I just make a blank shell and I just go. But for that purpose, Timeline Genius. It's because it has like, you could have all the vendors listed, who they are, their contact info, a spot for notes, and have everything. And you can like choose if it's like bridal party that I'm printing out for their timeline and photographer for their timeline and whoever else. So it's like, that's how I manage it all. Before I used that program, it was Google Docs or another program I use, which was Aisle Planner, which has a built-in, but it's, again, you just click a time and you write. So, yeah.
Awesome. So, besides your tools, is there any events that couples could go to maybe have better education on timelines or weddings or anything like that?
Well, mine. To get more education and to understand things, you could go to my event, which is called WedWise. But they can, consult with planners. They can talk to their vendors. I feel like a lot of couples now go to TikTok or Instagram or YouTube or what have you to get everyone's perspective. I know people right now who are in that generation of getting married love to hang out on like Reddit, and I love Reddit, but I also feel like Reddit is the Wikipedia of the world where like everyone has an opinion and they're just all writing it down, and you ask you one question and me another, and we're going to get 2 different answers. So education-wise, I really think you should trust the pros. I think that's really what it comes down to.
It's funny, I don't really do Reddit that much, but for some reason I'm connected to a Reddit that AITHA or something. Am I the asshole? I don't know why I'm connected to that one.
I love it.
But I always get like pings on my phone, on my watch, like, and then like I see like, my friend said, and then I have to like, okay, now I have to read this one. And I'm like, oh, why am I reading this stupid stuff?
Yeah, no, I know.
I have to like get more into Reddit, but that's the only thing that
I get it.
So when it comes down to timelines, what are common mistakes or problems that couples who might not have a planner or might not know about to planning a timeline? What's the issues, I guess, with what doesn't work?
Ooh, I feel like the biggest issue that couples have with timelines, especially if they don't have a planner or a vendor who can kind of navigate, is really twofold. One, if they have a wedding that's not on site of the venue. I feel like people really struggle with like how to structure their day. Like, do they have a church ceremony that's at 2, but their cocktail hour is at 5, and they're not doing a first look, and now we got to cram all those pictures from 3 to 5, and they don't go to cocktail hour, and then they miss a big portion of their day. I feel like people really don't understand that they need to really think about the day as a whole. I also feel like every couple has different expectations, right? So for some couples, it's like, we want to just have a great day and and have fun and have a great party. And some people are like, we just really want our pictures and to talk to people and to hang out with our friends, and really like music is not their biggest I guess, situation that they're looking forward to for the reception. Maybe it's the speeches that they want, like it's the ceremony, whatever the case is. 9 times out of 10, it's usually that they want a great party nowadays. And so coming up with the best way to run that reception is always challenging, because if you talk to a venue, they're going to want to do it a certain way. If they talk to an entertainer, they're going to want to do it a certain way. If they talk to a planner, they're going to want to do it a certain way. And I have adopted a hybrid. I want to make everybody happy. That's my job, right? And so I think really figuring out, this is kind of, again, figuring out what it is that you really want your day to look like is the first step to figuring out how you should lay out your timeline. Does that kind of answer your question?
No, yeah,
hopefully?
that definitely does it. So when it comes down to timelines, how early should you start thinking about like planning the specific details of all the times of what, how should you start that clock?
From day one.
Day one, wow.
Day one. And the reason is because, again, like if you are getting married not on site, you really need to think about, like, because you book your church or whatever it is, like when you first book your venue. So for example, if you're booking a church wedding and you have cocktail and you say to yourself, okay, what are our non-negotiables, right? Like we don't want a first look. We want a church wedding, no first look. And so that means that no pictures are going to happen before Mass. If you don't do your church wedding until 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that is a full Mass and it takes an hour, and you have an hour to then have to travel back to the venue, which has happened before, or 45 minutes or whatever, all of this is eating into the crux of the day, not the first half. So for me, it's, really thinking about what you want for the full day. What is it that you can't change, right? So if the venue's like, hey, we have a hard stop at 10 p.m., you got to work backwards. That's what when I talk to all of my clients, that's what I say, work backwards, work backwards. So if it's ending at 10, it's starting at 6 for a 4-hour reception. 5 o'clock is cocktail, which means your ceremony, if you're doing it on site, would be 4:30, usually, unless it's longer. But if that's the case and you have a ceremony that's at, like we were just talking about before, that's super close to that, now you're trying to cram everything in there, and that's not good for the photographer, that's not good for your family, that's not good for you. It's going to be so stressful. And we know this because we've lived it, but they don't know this. And so so you really need to think about what you want for the whole day, what your factors are, what's not changeable, and what's important to you.
Awesome. So what point do you think is the most underestimated, like, time glitch when it comes down to timelines and weddings? Like, what don't couples think the most about? Or is there an issue that you recognize within weddings where people are like, they don't put enough time to thinking about that moment?
A couple things. First look, now a lot of couples choose to read private vows. And so for when couples are thinking about their day, they don't know, right? They don't understand what is going to take a long time. They don't understand what is going to be 5 minutes, right? So the first one I would say is first look, right? If you have a regular traditional first look, that could take 10 minutes, that could take 15 minutes, depending on how emotional they are and how much it takes, they have to collect themselves. But if you're doing private vows and they want it on camera and they want it on video with audio, like that whole production takes a little bit of time to set up. Also, getting dressed in the morning. Like, you don't just throw on your wedding dress and like, okay, like we're gonna go and do our thing. Like, everything is sort of like elongated and staged if you want the pictures of that. And that whole process in the morning takes a lot longer than people realize. Also, like the reception part of the day and how they want it to go. Because if your goal is to have everybody on the dance floor dancing, there's a way to set up the reception so that can happen. Whereas if you don't talk about that early, you're probably going to get something where you're stopping and starting and stopping and starting, and it's going to be very disjointed and not what you want. So, yeah.
How do you deal with vendors who, specify a certain kind of timeline that doesn't meet, I guess, the couple's expectations or your expectations, As a DJ personally, like, I love to have a half an hour dancing before dinner, Some couples don't want that, and that's irritating to me, but it's something you have to deal with. So how do you deal with like a DJ who's stressing about this half an hour but that's not what the couple want? How do you balance that out, I guess?
So I think the best way that I deal with vendors and clients that are like conflicting about timeline is we're all on team couple. We're all on team couple, and they're the boss. They hired us, they have a vision, and we gotta maybe elicit what they want and then spin it into a way that's gonna be effective. Because if we listen to all of our clients, then they would not have successful weddings. They really should listen to us. They hired us. We're the pros. But we're all on team couple, and if the couple is like, hey, like, I don't want my speeches until much later in the night, during dinner. And the venue's like, well, we can't do this until this happens, and you don't get that dance set in the beginning, then I have a candid conversation with the DJ, and I'm like, hey, like, this is our parameters to work around, and at the end of the day, it's what the couple wants. Like, we know what's gonna work, we know what's gonna be great and effective, but if the couple doesn't want it, you can argue as much as you want to, but they're the boss. And that's, at the end of the day, they're gonna make their decision. I actually had this happen to me recently with a couple where, and I love them to pieces, but they had a wedding where it was the strangest lineup for the reception that I had done in a really long time. And it was like they wanted to do their entrance, they wanted to have everyone come out on the dance floor and dance with them for a bit. Then they wanted to sit down and eat salads and only do one half of the family speeches. And then they wanted to do a dance set for only 15 minutes and then do dinner and then have the other family speak and then have the other family do their, like, the parent dances weren't grouped together, the speeches weren't grouped together, like everything was just like all over the place. And we went back and forth and back and forth, and we talked to the venue, we talked to the music, like the DJ company, we talked to the, and I just finally said, you know what, I'm not gonna win. I'm not gonna win. And you know, this is what they really want, this is what's in their head and in their minds, and we can give it to them. And at the end of the day, like, I don't want them to be upset with me because their wedding, you know, was different than what they pictured. And if I'm sitting here and they're just not going to take my advice, then you just sort of have to say, okay, and do the best that you can. And everyone's going to do the best that they can. And I always say to them, hey, on day of, if we need to go and rework this because you're like, you were so right, I'm so sorry, we'll do that. But it worked out. They had a great time. And you know what? It was different. And now I can pull that out of my pocket and say, you know what, this is, we can do it. So, yeah.
Any other horrible stories when it comes down to timelines? And
Oh, Chris.
Like brides showing up late. I once had a bride that I think showed up, it's like 3.5 hours late. So like we were like supposed to be well into her reception by the time she got there. We still had to do ceremony and everything. So that was my horror story.
Oh,
and it was the biggest wedding I've ever done. It was like 600 people, you know, at the Robert Treat Hotel. It was just like so any kind of crazy horror stories when it comes down to timelines?
Oof. I mean, I've had a couple show up a half hour late for their church ceremony, and that's because of the transportation and the traffic. I've had a lot of stories I don't know that I can really repeat on here is the biggest problem, but you know, we had a client where I don't think she liked the groom's family very much, and so like literally we were supposed to do a first look and then a bunch of pictures and then ceremony, and she basically made it so that way the hair and makeup artist couldn't leave, and literally like lined it so they had just enough time to do first look and then walk down the aisle, which then we just had to pivot, and that's what you do, you pivot. I have a lot of other ones that I probably could talk about, but I don't want to get in trouble, so I won't do that. But yes, you just pivot.
Can you recall any moments where you feel that you have created or established a timeline that greatly helped the couple, like, really meet their wedding goals for their day? You know, like, obviously, you know, planning a wedding is so much stress and stuff like that, but, like, organizing a couple and getting their mind together, is there, like, any specific stories that you remember where you're like, wow, this really helped out this couple because they were like on road for like a shit show? So
yeah, so a really great couple of mine had some, you know, really big goals for their wedding, and so part of like what I did with them with timeline is to be able to really sort of restructure what they had in mind. was, again, and I keep going back to this church ceremony, but I feel like it happens all the time, where they have, I actually did this wedding with Nick Spinelli, and he basically, the groom and the bride, they wanted to get married in church, and it was basically they could do a 4 o'clock ceremony or they could do like a 1 o'clock ceremony, which is like super early. I think it was 12 or 1 o'clock. And I said to them, listen, I said, you know, you have a huge amount of time to do pictures in between. Even if you do a full mass, like your cocktail hour is not till like 5 or 6. But if it was going to be at 4 and they did a full mass, they would have no time for anything unless they had to do their pictures. So they lined everything up and they did a first look before they went to the church. And that was awesome because they were able to like capture a really intimate moment on the property with the light in a certain way, and then go over with everybody to the church, do that, and then have all this time for these really amazing creative photos that they really wanted with their photographer, who's a great friend of mine, and then have this killer party. Like everything was done, and then that way they could take a nice big sigh of relief and really enjoy the cocktail hour that they paid for. That was an hour and a half, and the reception that they paid for. And they were guests at their wedding, which is the goal. So, yeah.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last question. Advice, I guess. Like ultimate, think about advice. If you can keep it between, because I'll probably put this all together at the end, between like 15 seconds and like 30 seconds or something like that. And this you could talk actually directly to the camera. Like just like tell brides and couples, like for timelines, like this is the most important thing, and then kind of rattle off. So.
Okay, so for timelines, the most important piece of advice I can give to my couples is to work backwards. You're gonna start with times that you cannot change, so whatever time you've locked in for your ceremony, cocktail, reception, and work backwards. Give yourself more than enough time. Think about things like traffic. Think about Great Aunt Sally, who's gonna be 3 hours late, and how that might impact your morning. Just really sit there and think of the whole day in general. And think about the times, again, that you can't change and work backwards. What do I mean? If your ceremony is, you know, at 4:30, you know, what time do we want to be done with pictures? We want to be done with pictures by at least 4, so that way you have a half hour to like reapply your lipstick, grab a drink of water before you walk down that aisle. So work backwards, look at the whole day as a whole, and take a deep breath because you're going to be married, but you know, just think about what you want.
Awesome. That's a wrap.
Cool.
That's a wrap, Brielle. Yeah! The first person shot. Yeah!
Very excited. Awesome.
Awesome.